Hello and welcome to the Minds on the Frontline Podcast, brought to you by the Frontline Strong Together 5 program. FST5 provides streamlined access to behavioral and mental health services, as well as crisis resources for Michigan's Frontline 5 workers and their families. This includes all professional, part-time, and volunteer firefighters, EMS, law enforcement, corrections officers, and 911 dispatchers in Michigan and their immediate family members. First responders and mental health experts collaboratively created FST5 to provide 24/7 live support, effective resources, and cutting-edge services to prevent and alleviate PTSD, anxiety, depression, and other frontline work-related mental and behavioral health challenges. Need help now? If you are a frontline worker in Michigan or an immediate family member experiencing any crisis, work-related, substance abuse, depression, relationships, finances, or any other, reach out by calling 1-833-34-STRONG or go to fst5.org for more information. I'm Jeff Lassers, one of the hosts of the Minds on the Frontline podcast, and I'm a professional firefighter, paramedic, educator, and content creator. Minds on the Frontline is co-hosted by Mike Mattern, who is also a professional firefighter and paramedic. In addition, Mike is a peer support team member for his fire department and the Frontline Strong Together 5 program, a board member of the Michigan Crisis Response Association, and the former chair of the Michigan Professional Firefighters Union Behavioral Health Committee. Mike has training and experience with frontline worker mental and behavioral health. On the other hand, I do not. My role is to produce the show, whereas Mike is our resident subject matter expert. Together, we hope to inform, educate, and entertain frontline workers, their families, and the public regarding the realities of frontline work-related mental and behavioral health challenges. Today, we are honored to welcome James Geering to the show. As the creator and host of the acclaimed Behind the Shield podcast, James has built a platform that highlights the health and wellness challenges faced by frontline workers. With over 1,000 episodes and 6 million downloads, the podcast has become a cornerstone resource for first responders, military personnel, and their families. Through candid and compassionate conversations with diverse guests, James inspires connection, education, and action for those navigating the pressures of frontline professions. Before becoming a powerful advocate for wellness, James served as a firefighter and paramedic for 14 years, working in both underfunded, high-pressure environments and elite, well-resourced departments. His first-hand experiences fuel his mission to improve resilience and mental health across the front lines. He is also the author of One More Light: Life, Death, and Humanity Through the Eyes of a Firefighter, and Kinder. Both delve into the complexities of frontline work and offer insights into systemic change and personal growth. During this episode, we begin with James' journey as a firefighter and paramedic and how his experiences inspired the creation of the Behind the Shield podcast. We then delve into the most pressing mental and behavioral health challenges facing frontline workers today, such as sleep deprivation, burnout, and systemic obstacles. Finally, James shares practical, evidence-based strategies for building resilience. He underscores the importance of peer support and culturally competent clinicians, and offers guidance for frontline workers and their families on seeking help and overcoming barriers. As always, we aim to provide a meaningful conversation that informs, educates, and inspires those on the front lines and their families. Please check us out on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook, and make sure to like and subscribe to all Minds on the Frontline podcast social media channels. Thank you, and enjoy the show. Well, James Geering, welcome to the show. How are you, my friend?
Very well. Thank you so much for inviting me on today. I'm excited for this conversation.
Mike and I have been looking forward to this one for quite a while. You know, obviously, you probably hear this a lot. You're kind of a name in the biz. You have cultivated a following based on you actually caring and having over 1,000+ conversations. And why I've been a follower of yours, because you ask very honest, straightforward questions. You bring cost-effective solutions. You talk about evidence-based solutions that are relevant. And so all of that has turned you into an author, a fitness guy, former firefighter paramedic, and now a podcast host and an author. So why don't you tell everybody who you are, what you do, and where you do it?
My name's James Geering. I'm originally from England. I grew up on a farm, son of a veterinary surgeon. So a very interesting upbringing. Dreamed of becoming a firefighter or a doctor or a stuntman when I was young. And I was English, so being a stuntman was not really exactly an easy road to follow. I was not academically gifted. So when I went down the route of medicine, when it got to what we call A levels, so 17, 18, I realized that there was actually maths and chemistry, and that was the end of that road. And then when it came to the fire service, I had a color vision test as part of the annual medical at school in probably when I was 13. And they said, oh, you're colorblind. You can never be a pilot. You can never be a firefighter. And so basically by the time I'm short after graduation, everything I wanted to do had been pretty much, taken off. So there was a very interesting kind of path because I ended up going to drama school to follow a girl, simply to follow a girl. I got into drama school. Ended up being good at all the stage combat stuff. I'd been a martial artist, a lot of my life. That took me traveling around the world with that same girl. And then I got to Australia and auditioned for a stunt role and got the job in Japan. We had pretty much all but broken up by that point. So I ended up going to Japan, working as a stuntman, meeting a different woman. The first relationship had ended, who was American, and that took me to the States. Well, the reason I kind of give this long drawn out story is when I got to America, I had this epiphany that I'm not colorblind. What are they talking about? I can see color. It's just maybe not the right shades. I'd probably be a terrible fashion designer. But so I challenged the medical, got into fire academy here, ultimately became a paramedic. And I didn't mention as well, what I did in Japan was a stuntman. So ever since then, I was a stuntman too. So long story short, I ended up becoming all the three things I was told I would probably never be able to do. So that brought me to the States. And then I had a very, very gypsy fire service career. I trained in Orlando. My first job was Hialeah in Miami, an amazing department because they were so underserved. I would probably compare them to how we hear about Detroit, like that kind of, lack of support, funding, etc. And then went over to California for a few years, was a Tillerman on a truck company in Anaheim, and then came back. And this was all, again, because of family moving. Ended up in the Orlando area the last 10 years of my career before I transitioned out to do this full time.
That's amazing. Wow. It's quite a story. The Japan part I wasn't familiar with, and man, that must have been actually crazy because I've seen just their commercials in Japan, and they can get wild, and some of their game shows. So I can only imagine what they had the stuntman doing.
That's it's like the coolest. It's like the coolest resume ever. You know what I mean?
Oh, I can't be a stuntman. So did you get your pilot's license? Yeah. I'm waiting for that one.
Yeah. When are you flying?
No, I'm no Tom Cruise, but no, it was Universal Studios I worked for, so it was an American company. So it was actually really cool because there was half American, half Australian in the cast. Because obviously we're all doubling, American movie stars. And it was a theme park, so the same one that you have in Orlando and LA. But then everyone else was Japanese. So the host of my show was Japanese. It was done in Japanese. So hearing John Connor and the Terminator speaking Japanese on the screen was quite funny. But they are just a beautiful, beautiful culture, just incredible people. And if I ever go back, Osaka, now their fire department, the Japanese, when it comes to the rope rescue side, they only kind of got into that really a few years ago, and apparently they blow us, the entire rest of the planet, they blow us out the water with their rope rescue in every competition. And so you think about that Japanese diligence and attention to detail and work ethic, and you apply it to the fire service. I mean, it's evident in the Japanese fire service.
Yeah, they're legit
I've seen
hyper athletes with
man.
cord.
Yes.
They have like a 1/4-inch cord, and they're making a Swedish swing out of it in 10 seconds. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And for anybody who doesn't know what that means, that probably sounded really dirty, but it's an actual thing.
It's an actual
I've seen that one.
So, you're huge name in mental health circles and things like that. When in your career did you kind of realize that behavioral and mental health issues are like real life concerns for frontline workers?
It all everything seemed to come together about 8.5 years ago. For some reason, there was this kind of paradigm shift, at least through my eyes sitting here in Florida. We, like in my department, I lost a guy that I was hired with to an opioid overdose. Around the same time, we had, I would argue this is probably a pivotal moment in a lot of us even being aware of this. There was a Chief David Dangerfield from the East Coast here. He took his own life, but he did a Facebook post before he did. And that just, ran the gamut. And so all of these kind of things happening, and for me, it wasn't just mental health; it was just health. And that was one of the opioid overdose is one of 6 funerals I went to in 2 years of people that I knew. That's not all the other people that we were losing left, right, and center. And so that was when I really realized that we just have a health problem, full stop. Because it's not one thing that kills us; it's everything. So. That's when I started writing blogs. That's when I was a huge kind of lover of podcasts. I remember one of my firefighter friends, probably 2 years prior, had said he had a podcast. I'm like, what's a podcast? It's some space stuff. What are you doing? Walking around in bubble wrap? And then you listen to one and you're like, oh, I'm an idiot. It's a radio show and it's, better than television. I got it. So that was the kind of, the genesis of the podcast was just, like I always tell people, that the origin story is tragedy. It's funerals, it's bagpipes and last calls, and bells and freaking helmets being given to heartbroken children. So once you take your head out of the sand, and I use that empathetically because our head is in the sand because we're just overworked and exhausted. But once you are able to take a step back and look around, especially when you've got this lens of 4 different fire departments around the country, then you start seeing, this really is an issue, because if you're just local, or maybe you're kind of your group, your Facebook group, whatever is your kind of area. Well, I've got, California and South Florida and Central Florida, and you start seeing these same departments losing people, over and over and over again. So that was really it. I would say 10 years ago, most of us were pretty ignorant to this conversation, and we didn't know. Like when we first entered the fire service, post 9/11, it was all about, right-hand searches and, sooty helmets pretty much. And then now fast forward 20 years, we realized that service burning in your heart can't be the only thing that you're talking about. You have to talk about what are we doing to allow these people to perform at a high level and then have a healthy retirement without this job killing them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of those things that we've looked at, and it's one of those things, like you said, there's been a huge shift, and it's a nice shift because now it's a shift towards the actual workers. Like how do we keep them up and running? Like we keep our trucks up and running. Whereas before it was, hey, just do your job, go in there, figure it out. And it's nice to see that thing is the whole portion of this is moving forward.
Yeah, the human maintenance has certainly been evolving based on real life conversations. Data will get you really far. But I think when people actually connect and talk about these things and lay it all out there, they can actually come up with solutions.
Well, you mentioned studies as well. What I've realized, and I was really kind of made aware of this when it comes to the 24/72 conversation, which I'm sure we'll get into, but people are like, oh, can you show me the studies of why this is better? And firstly, you're asking me to show a study why a 56-hour work week is worse than a 42-hour work week. So, I said I was bad at math. Obviously, you're even worse. But when you actually dive into where is the research being done on the wellness of the first responder, there's very, very little. And even if you look at, for example, cancer, if you ask someone who's been in the cancer research area for a while in the fire service about sleep deprivation and shift work, it's a blank stare. Usually, or certainly was till very recently. If you ask someone about the mental health and sleep deprivation, it's a blank stare. So when you say, show me the data, I'd love to. I'd love to pull out a binder with 1,000 studies, but the fire service didn't really seem to care. They're more worried about, either carcinogens in the gear. Obviously, PFAS is the latest thing. And then with the mental health, CISD, peer support. But if you actually dive into the elephant in the room for all of these, the hormonal disruption, the weight gain, the autoimmune disease, all the things, sleep deprivation is it. So we can't avoid it. And this is what's so amazing is that we talked about a paradigm shift of awareness. Now in 2024, there's a beginning of a paradigm shift of actually addressing that part and realizing that giving first responders the rest and recovery they need, not want, they need, is not only the answer to all these ill healths that we're seeing, but it's also the answer to the recruitment crisis and the financial side.
So you just rattled off a lot of different things that are big problems, not little problems. These are big, big problems that we need to invest in to fix. That no amount of money is just a bolus of it's not going to make that problem inoculate and go away. It's got to be an investment in time, money, energy. In addition, you've had over 1,000 conversations just in your podcast alone. And out of all those different issues you're talking about, what is the most pressing issue for the mental and behavioral health challenges that are facing first responders today? Because you're not just talking to firefighters. You've talked to everybody, cops, military, their families, their kids. I've heard a lot of them. So based on that whole spectrum of people and all the things you kind of already talked about, what's the number one?
The biggest thing, to be honest, I mean, there's so many areas, but if I was to distill everything down and say, all right, just pull out one thing that's going to make the biggest difference to people at this moment, we can work on other things down the road. It would absolutely be the sleep deprivation conversation. And that was really me listening to Dr. Kirk Parsley, former Navy SEAL turned physician that ended up being the SEAL team's doctor. He was on Barbell Shrugged, which is a weight strength and conditioning show. It was the old one where they had this specific group of guys. It was amazing. And I'm driving going, why didn't I know about this? I've been an athlete and an exercise physiologist major and all this stuff. And like, I'm oblivious to this. Why aren't we talking about this? And this was, again, I mean, I listened to Kurt probably 9 years ago, 8.5. And so every single person I talked to, like Dr. Stuart McGill, known as the back mechanic, when it comes to back health and back injury, he's the guru. He talks about if you are not sleeping, you're not repairing, you will get hurt. Not if, you will get hurt. You know, hormonal disruption, you're seeing. You know, you ask most people in a firehouse these days, let's just take men as an example because it's an easier metric to understand. Ask them about their testosterone. You got guys either side of 30 with a T of, 200-300. And we're wondering why they're exhausted and gaining weight and struggling with their mental health. So that's what I started realizing. And then I talked to the experts in the Navy SEALs, the Air Force, the Army, the sports world. These are all the sleep experts for those. And the Venn diagram overlaps over and over and over again. So when it comes to the recruitment crisis, because obviously you want to compound first responder ill health, then find less of them to work and ask them to shoulder the load for everyone else. Kind of like, again, the SEAL teams in Hell Week. One person taps out, well, the rest of them have still got to carry the log. This is what's happening in our communities. So now we're wondering why more of them are taking their own lives. More of them are having heart attacks. More of them are getting cancer because now those mandatory overtimes are going to the people that are left. The police officers that turn around and said, I'm done. They hang up their gun belt. It's the rest of them that are holding the line. So the only way we turn this around to when we all tested 20 years ago against hundreds, if not thousands of people, is that we've got to fix the things that are broken. If the way that we did it worked, we'd be talking about, whatever, something else right now. I wouldn't have a podcast. I'd still be on the rig. But it doesn't work. So this is why giving responders the rest and recovery they need shows these young recruits who are astute, who value their time with their family, their physical health, their mental health. It shows them that this is an environment for them to thrive. And now you're going to have people starting to test and get excited about being in the fire service or EMS again. But if we bury our heads in the sand, there will be a critical mass. Because people are saying at the moment, oh yeah, we're still hiring. We're still able to get enough. But if you used to take 10% from a list, and now you take 95% from a list, and you've lowered standards, there's only a matter of time before everything's going to break. So this is why, from recruitment, from physical health, from mental health, from saving these broken marriages and relationships that we see over and over again, childhood diseases that we're passing to our kids, whether through carcinogens, whether actually, genetically, all these things we can fix or we can make a huge dent on if we finally give these responders the work week. That, I mean, just to tangent quickly, if you look at the progressive corporate space, they're switching to a 4 8-hour day week. So that's 32. So if Google and Virgin are realizing that productivity and the health of their employees is actually going to be the same with less hours in the office, they're like, okay, that works. As long as we're getting the same amount done, sometimes even a little bit more, because it's forging innovation. How can I make those 32 hours at work as productive as 40? So if we really want to say the fire service is a business, then, as I always say, don't model an Indonesian sweatshop, model Google or Virgin. So this is the biggest takeaway. So
well, let's get into that a little bit. This is something that's very, very big to you and dear to your heart. I mean, I've heard you speak on this passionately, and nobody's sponsoring you to travel around and talk about this. You're taking your own time to speak on the necessity for rest and recovery for all humans, and really pointing out, when you put people in a first responder role, you better have a plan to R&R them. If you don't, you're going to break them much faster than your fire trucks. And it's going to get a lot more expensive in the form of not only financially, but the human lives that are going to be affected by this.
Absolutely.
So let's pull on that string a little bit. Talk about the 24-hour, 72 work week. And then let's also acknowledge the other 4 demographics of the FST5 and get your thoughts on the type of R&R they need as well. And that's not just fire, but EMS, which is kind of in there too, but law enforcement, corrections, and dispatch.
So let's start with fire. When you look at the work week, what I've seen for the longest time now, and obviously this is what's so crazy. There is a large portion of the Northeast that's working a 24/72. It's working a 42-hour work week and have for a long time. And so the rest of the country is like, oh, that'll never happen. It's like, those people that you do keep copying their hose loads and their ladder throws, they don't work 56 hours a week. Certainly, 10, 15 years ago. So the biggest thing, firstly, I think is the myth that we all went in. And it didn't come from any malice. It just came from a complete lack of willing to change. But we say, like, for example, we work 1 day on, 2 days off. Well, we don't. We work 3 days crammed together in a 24-hour period, because a civilian works a 9-hour day with a 1-hour lunch normally. Okay, so that's 3 days on, of which the third of those bleeds into that second day. So 3 days on, 1 day off is what we actually work. So, and that's 30 days a month. You start, bragging to your neighbors about that. It doesn't sound so good anymore, because it's not. That's the point. So this is the real realization is, that we've been telling ourselves, and we believe it all the way up the ranks. That literally civilians will ask us, why is there a fire engine on my medical call? We've been doing EMS in Florida, at least, for 50 years. So what a horrible job we've done at storytelling and branding in the fire service, that the average person still thinks that we sit around, patting a Dalmatian and playing cards. It's crazy. So the answer really lies in Florida, in this one department called Boca Raton, which is a wealthy department. But through no progressive, visionary leadership, they were doing a 42-hour work week, I think, but it was, 12s or 10s and 14s, whatever it was. And from what I understand, it was almost like a pissing match between the union and fire, or administration. And so they forced a 24-hour shift on them. Well, that ended up being a 24/72, which stuck. So for the longest time, they were known as this like mythical unicorn that's kind of pooping out rainbows in our area. But when I started to dive in and listen to the sleep conversation, I realized, but this is 42 hours a week. This is still, as much, if not a little bit more than most civilians work, but we're awake most, if not all of the night, every 2-3 days of a week. So that was the biggest thing, is realizing that if it works for the Northeast, if it works for this, I know Bryan, Ohio, Paul Combs, his department, worked 24/72. So when you look at it and you're like, well, if you put this extra time in between the shifts, which is what all these sleep experts are telling me, then you would make a massive dent on their health, their physical health, all the things that we know are an issue. So that was the initial thing. But the pushback was crazy, like the resistance, because it would just get, oh, they'll never go for it. Oh, that'll never happen. Oh, we can't afford a new shift, or we can't even hire people now. And so then I'm like, all right, well, let's get answers to all these questions then. And so you start speaking to people, and I'm like, what are you spending on overtime at the moment? You can't hire anyone. You've got all this overtime. Millions and millions of dollars these departments are spending just on overtime. Now, I'm more concerned about the person working the overtime that's not seeing their children, that's missing birthdays and games and gymnastics and school plays and all the things. But you realize that the money's there, and then when it comes to the recruitment, you realize that this is what these young people are looking at and being dissuaded by. It's not that they don't want to work. It's if you lay it out on a piece of paper and you say, all right, this is how much you're earning, but let me show you your hourly rate because you're working 56 hours. So your salary, it's funny, they put cops and fire together. That firefighters work like, 15, 20 hours more for that same salary. But then let me tell you about mandatory overtime, which when I've worked could be literally every 2 weeks you get hit again. So, and you put it, and let me tell you about, suicide, murder as well, sadly, in our profession. Overdose. Let me tell you about your hormones. Let me tell you about fertility or infertility, childhood diseases, marital problems. And let me put that there too. These young people are looking at it going, this sounds terrible. I'm going to go work for UPS. I want to serve, but this is not the way to do it. How many US military said, I'm going to go join the Foreign Legion? No, because they knew it was going to be really shitty. They joined the US Army when they were supported. It's the same with us. We've got to get back to being excited about the profession, but also showing these young people, look, it's a 42-hour work week, 24 on, but then you're going to have a 72-hour period off. Because we've done that, we've got this massive demand for people again. Most of our vacancies are filled. There will be some overtime sometimes, hurricanes, wildfires, whatever it is. But, most of the time we should be fully staffed. So when you are supposed to go home, you will go home, So you pull all these together and it just makes perfect sense. And then what was beautiful is literally less than 2 years ago, Boynton Beach, Florida was the first one to actually go to it. And their chief, Hugh Bruder, is amazing. And he shows not just about the 24/72, but even culturally, like thinking like a destination department again, thinking as a department that everyone is like clawing at the doors to work for. And Anaheim was like that when I worked for them. No one left Anaheim. I was an anomaly. So, and then you start to see more of a groundswell. Well, what's beautiful now is that as this is starting to gain traction, now the more complacent departments are looking, going, well, we can't even hire people now. And if they go to a 24/72, we're really not going to be able to hire anyone. So now this is where I think this kind of national push is going to be. It is the right way. These departments are realizing they're saving a lot of money because, you think about, you've got a healthier workforce. Firstly, the overtime's gone away. Now your workman's comp claims are going to go down because people are just healthier. There's actually been studies on the reduction in use of sick time in a happy, healthy workforce. So that goes down. Like I said, you've got this recruitment uptick again. So now, there's definitely not the understaffing. You think about the cost of our health insurance. If we're a healthier workforce, our premiums will come down. You think about, medical retirements would come down, line of duty deaths would come down. You see what I'm saying? And then the one no one talks about, the lawsuits, hitting a car in an intersection, pushing the wrong drug, being too rough with a patient, whatever it is. Most of those are because we're overworked and exhausted and, burnt out. So all of those things, all of those little, quaffers, the bags of money are going to start, are they going to fill because they're not being dipped into over and over again. So that when people saw that you could save money hand over fist and make your department healthier and happier.
I just hope that those decision makers don't let their opinions sway them, but more of the data and information that's available. Because I think a lot of times you're like, oh, you fire guys just don't ever want to work, do you? And it's just not the case. It's just truly not the case.
I think anybody who would work a 24 with us would see the impact of a 24-hour, and then you got to go back 24 hours later.
And there's some departments that do 48.96, and I don't want to dive into just fire stuff here, but I mean, that's obviously got its own set of issues. Some guys like it, some guys don't.
Let me jump into that because I just interviewed the guy that did the study on that, and this is an important point.
Oh, yeah.
Joel Billings, just wanted to research a better schedule, and they were comparing the 24-48 and the 48-96. He did this study with a local department, and what ended up happening really was the later wake up on the second day was slightly beneficial because you're not having to get up and drive to work. The answer to that on any shift is just have a 11 a.m. midday start time anyway, and then you've already got that for free. But what people didn't understand, they jumped on this. Oh, we've got to see the data. Oh, there's a study that it's better. The department that he studied, and this is his words, ran less than one call a night. Less than one call a night. So you've got all these.
Yeah.
One call a night, that's nothing. That's literally nothing. So if you're basing it on that, come on.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's why, you can take data and not understand it and destroy your department with this study. So sorry to jump in, but it's an important thing for people to know.
No, you're right. And it reminds me of a conversation where somebody, I think, printed out the study and threw it on the table and they said, see, they did a study. And it's like, did you read this thing? And so, but yeah, it's certainly going to have strengths. I mean, if you have to drive a lot of hours on that, but I mean, the overwhelming weaknesses to less rest and recovery is the bigger issue here. Mm-hmm. So what do you do for the other ones that have to work 8s, 10s, and 12s? Some of our private EMS and sometimes our professional fighters don't even work 24s.
Or you got dispatchers. Dispatchers are working a ton of mandatory overtime because they're short-staffed or whatever.
We spoke to one person who was a dispatcher, and depending on how short-staffed they are in a day in a 12-hour period, she answers the phone between 200 and 500 times in a shift. That to me, I can't insane. Do that.
No. But then they expect perfection out of it.
Yeah, and especially when someone's calling 911 for any reason, whether it's they're mad at their neighbor because they're messing with their lawn or something really bad has happened.
Yeah, I think what I've seen, because I mean, again, doctors, nurses, there's all these professions. It's just again about making sure they have the rest and recovery between the shifts. Police can't work a 24. Obviously, they don't have a fire station. They're in their cruiser. Dispatchers. I mean, I have so much empathy for dispatchers because you think about taking that call and it is an acute call and, my baby's turned blue and they're screaming, and we get there, and we work a code and go to the hospital and we've seen the outcome. And let's say it was a vehicle wreck or something. Well, now we're extricating. So we've got a physical release too. That dispatcher doesn't know the outcome. They went to work when it was dark. They sat in a dark building for 12 hours. And then all of these calls, they had no physical release. So for dispatch, I think we need to just understand that they need to get outside. They need to move around. They need to offload some of these calls, and it's about staffing because, again, if you're doing an 8 or a 10 or a 12, it is what it is. Like, we know you can do that, but it's how much rest and recovery are they getting between their shifts? If a civilian is seen to be like a 40-hour week is acceptable, and now if we're getting progressive, a 32-hour week, then shouldn't the people that we're asking to stay awake and watch over us that we call with 3 numbers on a phone that either answer or jump in a rig and tear towards their address, that maybe we should hold them to that lower work week or even less, so more staffing and more rest and recovery because, the guy in the bakery in Publix supermarket is not required to have the same level of fitness and, critical thinking than a 911 operator or a police officer. So this is, we've just got it so distorted. We need to just give them more rest and recovery, and they will be better at their jobs and they will be healthier. So in the 8s or 10s or 12s, it's the same exact thing. Okay, if you need, if everyone works 12s almost back to back and that takes 10 people, then clearly you need 14 people to actually do it properly and space it out. So I think, with the fire, we're asking for that more, that extra rest and recovery in between shifts. It would be the same concept in the other professions too. It would just obviously look different.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great for all aspects. I mean, what you're talking about, and we're talking about a lot of different strategies here to help our first responders. And another one of the strategies that has really come up over the past couple of years is talking about kind of resiliency. And I know you've had a ton of conversations on your podcast about this. What have you found in your conversations that seems to be the most effective kind of resilience building strategies that these frontline workers can use? Yeah,
because the reason we want to know that is because we talk about the fact that the rest and relaxation, the recuperation, I should say, is highly effective, right? But at the same time, it's not always possible. So the resiliency, that ability to recover, to keep it together, recover and get back into it, we need it. So what is that balance?
We used to talk about resilience. Like one of my friends, he had a program and he put firefighters through, they'd go through mazes and they'd be playing loud music and, smoke and all the things. And I understand that concept, kind of like training the nervous system a little bit. Where I feel resiliency actually is, and this just goes for life in general, is, and it ties into that post-traumatic growth message, the hope, which is, the theme of my second book, my new book. One of the least understood elements of first responder mental health is what happened to us from birth, or maybe in vitro even, through to when we put the badge on our chest. No one ever asks about that. We're not asked about that. We're screened at the front door with psychological tests and polygraphs, but we're not asked. We're not, given any tools to process what we brought in. Some of that childhood experience can be an absolute strength. It can be, just invaluable when it comes to dealing with some of the stresses and discomfort and, even the compassion and empathy side. But if it's just buried down and left unaddressed, it can be a crack in the foundation. So for me, and this is just my personal opinion, if we're really talking about resilience comes from struggles that have then been worked through. In my journey, I think I did 3 or 4, I think it was 4 psychological tests, the Minnesota multiphasic personality interview, MMPI, which the entire mental health professionals that I've had on have all said that was never meant to be a standalone test, certainly not to a first responder.
All 1,100 questions of it in a 3-hour window, and man, that was stupid.
It's ridiculous. And then the polygraph, it scared the hell out of me the first time I have to have a polygraph, because I'd done some fun stuff when I was younger. But then I looked into it like, oh, no, it's just a magic trick. And if you just, do this and do that, then you'll be fine. And I did this and did that. And oh, yeah, it was. Don't confess to anything, but it's a magic trick. It's all it is. It's no different than the coin behind your ear. So I'm looking at that going, well, all this money that these departments are spending, thousands and thousands and thousands, why not take that same money, do a background check, that you normally do a written test, do a physical test, do an interview. So you figure out, can they do the job and do you like them? And then the money you were wasting on those 2 things, put your new recruits through 6 sessions of counseling. They can talk about the weather, or they can start opening up about the sexual abuse from the karate teacher that they had. Whatever it was, now you're fostering resilience at the front door, because you're taking struggles, you're allowing them to process, and now that becomes a strength. So yes, you get resilience from shared suffering, and I'm all about putting the bar super high. Anaheim's bar was so high, and I watched it forge amazing firefighters, compassionate, strong, fearless firefighters. So that needs to be up there for physical resilience. The mental resilience, the same, that shared suffering, that discomfort and collapse mazes and all the things. Absolutely, climbing the aerial and testing us to make sure that we're not going to crumble when we need to. But I think the real deep down core resilience and that longevity also comes from understanding that if you're going to be a good firefighter or soldier or, police officer, there's a good chance you've got some stuff in your background that probably needs to kind of be molded a little bit. So that's my whole thing on the resilience thing. I think really we've missed a great opportunity to take a moldable 18, 20, 22-year-old and give them these mental health tools so that can become a strength as they forge through the career. And then that makes working through mental health issues hopeful. It makes it exciting because you realize there's a better James Geering on the other side of me going through whatever my personal toolbox of mental health tools are.
I love how you explain the resiliency, going through something and making it out the other side with some help. And I think about that as you're talking about it, and peer support comes up into my mind. To those departments, that's kind of that peer support is helping build that resiliency while they're there. and the peer supporters, the culturally competent clinicians are all there to kind of help you through those issues. And I've seen it doing peer support for the past couple of years. You see some of these people come in, they've never had peer support, they never had mental health, they have an issue go on, whatever it might be. It might be a run, it might be a life issue, whatever. And then you see both. Could be both. And then you see them, you help them through that issue. They come out the other side, and you almost see them with a little bit of a swagger now.
Right.
You know what I mean?
It's more confident that, because they've obviously been worried about that wound, that potential, that weakness, quote unquote, that they have.
But the other cool part is seeing them then take that and take it to somebody else. Mm-hmm. Like they have the confidence now to talk about their problems with somebody else to help them through the issues.
In whatever that looks like.
Yes, whatever it may be. And that's why we see a lot of these peer supporters coming in now who were some of the people who needed help early on.
Yeah, and I think we're going to see that especially with the first wave of peer supporters. It's the people stepping up to identify the fact that they had troubles. And I think the future waves of peer supporters will be like people that just want to help. They don't necessarily have a history of such a need for it. But let me ask you, how do you see peer support and culturally competent providers playing a role in supporting the mental and behavioral health of frontline workers?
Going what you said first, that absolutely is a thing. Like they become a beacon of light, and the number of people I know that have been through their struggles, for example, have told it on the podcast after they made it through, and now people come out the woodwork. Hey, can I have a word with you for a second? I heard you on that thing, and I've been going through some stuff. And you really want to initiate a conversation with someone that you think maybe is struggling, you have to be vulnerable first. You have to say, hey, you look like you're going through some stuff. Man, when I went through my divorce and I was going through medic school and I was a single father, and then all of a sudden you've lowered your ego and you've made a safe space, to use that term properly. And now these people feel comfortable actually opening up. So I love the idea of peer support. It needs to be the right people, of course. And this is, and I understand we're really kind of splitting hairs now, but there's a danger, and I've heard this locally, that half the peer support team are alcoholics. You got to make sure that the right people, have done the work. They don't have to be, perfect. None of us are perfect. We're going to have highs and lows. But yeah, you've got to make sure that this is someone who truly is, has found themselves on the other side. Because if you haven't traversed that journey, if you haven't been through the struggles, you're not going to be able to really help as much. And then the competent clinician side, I always say this, I have heard so many, this acronym always falls out of my head. What's the EAP? I've heard so many EAP horror stories, so many. And what terrifies me is how many have I not heard, because that was the last thing that person tried to do. The clinicians that start crying, clinicians that tell them they can get out, I can't help you, that just pull out a prescription pad and then, off you go. So having people that understand who we are, what we do, and being able to really interact with us, people that are open-minded, that it's not just pills, or, that EMDR isn't their like craziest left field solution, that may be talking about ketamine and some of these other things too. And if someone, if you're really struggling, let's have the conversation about psychedelics and, MDMA. And I mean, if it's going to save a life, you can't, we talk about stigma, we got to go down that route too. So really having people that understand what we do, and then having, a few of them, because they might be amazing what they do, but they just don't click with John or Jane or whoever. And so that's not a failure too. Understanding, if you're looking for help, that you might have to see 2, 3, 4 people before you get to that one that's the right match. But yeah, if they're not competent, and I've heard this from a lot of the clinical psychologists that I talk to, there's all these levels, and almost anyone could call himself a therapist. I think it's a therapist, but a life coach. But yeah, the education that some of these people have, need to have. But you look at a lot of these websites, and these mental health professionals say they deal with, and it's like 20 things, expert in first responders and military and plumbers and raccoons and whatever it is. And that's BS. Like, if you have a specialty, you have a specialty. And it's a full-time job if you're a first responder, mental health professional. So we need more culturally competent clinicians. It's just that simple. Because there are so many people, as this starts to really, unfold and we pull the curtain back properly, there is a huge demand. And that doesn't mean that you're going to need to see them the rest of your life. I believe in this post-traumatic growth, this development of resilience. But, of course, you'll circle around, every time you need a tune-up. But, both of those are very, very important. The peer support to just simply be there and be that first person, but also understanding, because I think some departments just check a box. Oh, we've got peer support. We're good on mental health. Locally, it's definitely a thing. But that's like, I have a telephone. That's not the fire service. That's not the law enforcement. You just have a phone to get those emergency people to come to you. That's what peer support is. So, so I think those two are invaluable when done properly.
I couldn't agree more. And that's why the Frontline Strong Together 5 program has done an amazing job of curating a very big list of culturally competent clinicians over the entire state of Michigan to make sure people know, here you go, here's the services they do, the type of things they specialize in, and every single one has been vetted out. I think Mike shows up at their house and berates them until... I'm just kidding.
No, I mean, I think it's as simple as just having a conversation with them. I think we're all good at reading people and whether they know what we do, how we operate, those types of things. And I think that's what's important is, like you talked about, I wish there was more places that had a specialty for first responders.
It's going to happen.
It's going to happen at some point because we are a specialty.
Yeah. There's certainly a demographic of humans that could utilize it. So if the numbers are the issue, they have the number needed to treat to create the thing. Well, we got that number.
Yes. And I think it's one of those things that down the road, it's going to happen. But right now it's unfortunately you have some of these clinicians who want to put out in the world that they work with first responders. Yeah. And the sad part is, after talking to those individuals, when they come to us and, hey, I need to find somebody, those people are doing way more damage than they are good. Because that's 6 months that person wasted with somebody who didn't know what they're doing. Yeah. Whereas we could have got them in with somebody who is culturally competent and making progress. And overall, we need to have a filter on these.
On everybody, not just frontline workers, but everybody needs kind of those people vetted out.
Yes.
I get it.
I think it's hugely important, but it's been a game changer when we found them.
Yeah.
Well, think about this. If you are someone who's struggling and it took everything to have the courage to go and ask for help, and you sit down in front of the wrong person, not a wrong fit, but the wrong person, like we talked about, the kind of person that doesn't know what they're doing, that hasn't worked with first responders, your hope is snuffed out, because that that these people are leaving. And I've heard it, from many, many people. Well, I must be crazy. Well, there's no point. I can't be fixed. I mean, they're wearing a white coat and they got a stethoscope. They are the be all and end all. So then you start that downward spiral. Like, all right, well, I'm just going to go finish what I was thinking about. So it's such an important conversation. It's such an important thing that we do filter, that we do have, these lists that are vetted, because think about the lives that we've already lost because that person went to the wrong clinician.
So, yeah, I mean, it's sad. I mean, I've been there. I've been on that couch looking for somebody, and the person is across from me is like crying after I'm telling them what's going on with me, and you had said that, and that's why I started to laugh a little bit, because I've been there, and it's about as much of a gut punch when you don't need one, when you try to find somebody and you can't find them. It's like you have to find that one little thing that's going to keep you, like you talked about, hope. You got to have that one thing that keeps you going for it. You know what I mean? And sometimes the people don't have it, and then that's it, and it's sad that it happens that way,
So considering the fact that we all agree that peer support and culturally competent providers is good as long as you do it right, there's still going to be a demographic of people that don't reach out. They just need help. They don't know either. They don't have the courage, like you said, or they just don't know where to even feel outside of that because they feel isolated or just reluctant to get help. So what advice would you give to those frontline workers and their families that should reach out and just having trouble doing so?
So firstly, with the families, I think a really important perspective is if the three of us worked in the same station and say on the same rig, and, I said, Jeff, how am I doing? I seem kind of tired. You're like, oh, James, you're fine. Well, because we're all in the same meat grinder together. So we have no idea how we're doing. We're exhausted, all the things. So one of the things that I started doing towards the end of my career was asking my wife and my son, how am I doing? Because they're not up for 24 hours. They know who I was before, and they see if I'm, low or, whatever the thing is. So I think I would tell the family members, don't be afraid to talk to your loved one and say, I'm worried about you. You don't see, I haven't seen you smile for like 2 weeks, whatever the thing. You kind of snap at the kids when you first walk in, but not, an accusatory way, just an empathetic way. I think that's a part of it, because that reluctance sometimes, we're kind of telling ourselves, the same with alcohol, oh, I can still, I'm fine the next day. We're good. You're kind of justifying it. So when it's the people that you love, telling you, and again, not blaming, not causing shame and guilt, because that on the flip side this was one of the biggest kind of aha moments I had when I listened to so many people that have been there. I mean, the number of people I had on the show that we were going to talk about strength and conditioning or, whatever it was. And we went down a mental health path just because we're all humans. Dan Johns, this world-renowned weightlifting coach. And we talked about trauma for the first 45 minutes. We didn't talk about barbells towards the end. So what I started hearing over and over and over again, and it just goes the complete opposite way of what we were all taught to think about suicide, which was it's selfish, it's cowardly, how could you think of your family? And you listen to these people, and through the perfect storm of all the things, so, unaddressed childhood trauma, sleep deprivation, organizational betrayal, side effects from alcohol and psych drugs and all the things, they truly at that moment feel like they are the reason for their family's pain. They are a burden to the people around them. And if they just take themselves out, and bearing in mind we're in a profession where we've signed on the dotted line saying that we will die for strangers, well, we'll certainly die for our loved ones. All of a sudden, in that distorted mind, it's not a healthy mind, but in that distorted mind, their thoughts are courageous and selfless, which is really hard to compute, but you can't understand it with a healthy mind. So you've got to be careful on not, you're always angry, causing more shame and guilt to that first responder. But if you're able to be more empathetic and just talk to them and say, look, I'm worried about you. You just don't seem happy. You've been drinking more. Can we go together? Can we go get help? I think that's a really big part of this whole thing. The other thing is if you've got someone who's hard-headed and maybe more old school, another way that I look at this is performance. If you can't get through to them on the mental health side, as far as just, empathy and getting help and working through it, and obviously that post-traumatic growth, that hope is a big part. You're not making it sad and depressing anymore. You're making it like, dude, do the work, and you're going to be amazed at the in a year's time. But also, if you've got the kind of salty, hard-headed guy, for example, you cannot be a good firefighter if your mind is a tornado. You cannot. If you listen to any high-performing athlete, you get in a flow state through high stress, the repetitions that you've done, and a calm mind. So if you want to be the salty, vent, enter, search firefighter, then you have to do the work and calm your mind. And the work is basically almost exactly the same thing anyway. So that's what I would say. The biggest thing is the people that love you, talk to your loved one, but make it empathy. Show them that you need them. Tell them, especially, use the words, you are not a burden to us. Because that should be on the front of all the blooming suicide posters, because I hear it over and over again, but no one talks about it. Sleep deprivation and the burdensome thing. But the other thing is, if you want to forge performance, if you want to be the best firefighters, man, we got to start meditating. We got to calm that mind down, and then obviously that can open the door then to therapy and all the things. So those will be some of the things that from all the people I've spoken to that really popped out. Because you can tell people, oh, just tell them, look, if you're struggling, call me. We all know that if you're struggling, you're not picking up a phone. You're not dialing the numbers. You need to get them. It's like
even if you did, we just call. There's still steps after the phone call.
Yeah.
And I think it's the lack of the steps after the phone call to maybe soften the feelings for now to get you through the night. I feel better now. When in all reality, you just kind of didn't address it. So yeah, it sounds like the follow through is so huge, and the reluctancy is just the hurdle in the way from you stopping being your best you.
Yeah. Well, when I was thinking just then, think of it like pre-code versus code. I have been the grim reaper of my career and never had a code save in 14 years. But it's the pre-codes where you save most people before they get to that point. So that's the way you've got to look at this. You don't wait until they're, about to go in VFib before you go, oh, they need help. Call me. My phone's always on. No, you need to be looking out when, they're starting to throw PVCs. You know what I mean? So I think that's
you
the
need
big
to make
thing.
the phone call to them.
Yeah,
that's
exactly
the important thing. Everybody says, hey, if you need anything, call me. If you're telling somebody that, you should probably be the one calling them to reach out, because when they're struggling, man, they're not going to pick up the phone.
Mike gets a lot of these calls, and he calls a lot of these people. So he's the guy I always lean on. I'm like, what do you do in this? Because I don't get those phone calls. I'm not trained for this. I'm like a glorified IT social media podcast guy.
But I think it's the follow-up too, though. I mean, just don't make that one phone call. Some of the best responses I've ever gotten doing peer support is when I just randomly called somebody. They popped into my head and said, hey, I wonder how this person's doing. And I either throw them a text or I throw them a call. And you'd be surprised how surprised they are that somebody even reached out, that they're more open to talk.
They caught you caring in a way they felt that you're serious.
Well, they knew you weren't BSing them.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Like
they were sold that you were there to help.
Yes. And I think that's another thing is, if, like you talked about the pre-code, you see these things, call them, talk to them.
Yeah.
Why wait until it gets to that point?
Medical control. I'm not sure what drug to give.
Yeah. But you can still start doing basic first aid.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, I mean, just reaching out and picking up that phone is basic first aid.
Yeah. You ain't kidding.
Absolutely.
Okay. So you basically ran us through like 10 years of your life, basically, and the things that you picked up along the way. And the last thing I want to hit you up on is, based on that experience, not just being a firefighter, paramedic, podcast, all the things, a dad, all the stuff, based on those experiences, how can policymakers, frontline leaders, and departments best support the mental and behavioral health of their personnel? Bottom line, the bosses. What do you have to say to them? It
circles again back to fixing what is broken. We have done the same job this whole time. People, call 911, the tones go off, we get in the rig and we respond to the fire, the extrication, the rope rescue, the cardiac arrest, whatever it is, the back to bed call. We always go. But when you look at the last 20 years, there's been this complete downward spiral. So, newsflash, that's a leadership problem. Clearly, your firefighters have been doing exactly what you asked them to do. But IAFF and, all these other national organizations, and then, locally, the chiefs, the city, the county managers, it might have been your forefathers, but they were doing things wrong. And this is where we are now. So the biggest thing that you can do is have the humility, firstly, to take a step back and say, for example, I, city manager, chief, go home every night at 5 o'clock. I work a 40-hour work week. My firefighters deserve the fact that I'm going to advocate for them to work the same that I do. So fixing that work week is huge, but then putting the bar back up. This is not a profession for the weak-minded or the weak-bodied, and this is where we kind of found ourselves at the moment with this lowering of standards. What should go hand in hand with creating a healthy work environment for your men and women is then putting the standards high. Because I promise you, I've seen it. Anaheim versus the last place I worked, arguably best and worst. When there is a standard, even the camaraderie and the mental health is going to be better. The longevity, the performance. When you have a low standard, it is the complete opposite. And I watched it. The one, where, like I said, no one ever leaves Anaheim. The other one, better paid, a little bit more time off than local agencies. It's known how low that bar is. They barely have enough people to fill their spots, so it's not about the money, for example. So investing in your people, understanding, like Richard Branson does with Virgin, he says, if you got a happy workforce, then the customer will be happy, not the other way around. So the 2472 to me should be a national standard, hands down. If the Northeast, has been working it, and now Florida is starting to see how it's just going to be beneficial in every way, If we can make that a national movement, we would revolutionize mental health, physical health, performance. Even like the way we're perceived by the public. We're just going to be happier and more friendly, and certainly fewer mistakes, which is, like I said, a massive thing. But then fitness standards too. If the ocean lifeguards are held at a fitness standard, if the Navy SEALs and the Green Berets and the PJs are held at a standard, we're protecting their families. For example, the place I worked last, which had no standards, my station was next to a 28-story hotel. I know that I can throw on a high-rise strip, which is 100 pounds on my body with everything, and climb those 28 and then go to work. I know that, many, many people in there can't. So imagine if your children were on the 28th floor and they died because those people couldn't get there. So I think those are the two things, is creating an environment for, performance and longevity, and then asking your men and women to reach that bar that a firefighter or a police officer should be able to reach. And in EMS, the ill health in EMS blows me away. If you're in the Vegas shooting and you're an EMT or a medic and you can't even see your freaking shoes, I don't know how we got here, but this is the other side of the conversation too. And you don't have to look like Ken and Barbie Ken, you just have to be able to do the job. But so that's, to me, the two things, is having the courage to invest in your people, give them rest and recovery, and then simultaneously put the standards back where they should be as a professional rescuer.
I like the second part of that, because you're not saying just if you just give rest and recovery, it'll fix it. It's like, no, the rest and recovery should serve you to be prepared for the next evolution of, training, execution, growth, whatever that is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this is an amazing conversation, sir. We really appreciate you. And we can't thank you enough for taking the time to be on the Minds on the Frontline podcast. And I think we might even be on his show soon.
Rumor has it.
Yep, you will be. So thank you so much for having me.
No, thanks for coming out. Thanks for your time. And honestly, this is a conversation that I'm glad we're having. And I'm glad that our responders here in Michigan are going to hear about, and they can digest it as well.
Absolutely. And we hope everybody in Michigan and around Michigan gets something out of this, because we connect with everybody down in Florida, California. It doesn't even matter where you are. It's almost the same everywhere. So we might as well learn from those people that have been doing it, having these conversations, talking about the evidence, the information, the relevance of it, and make some big changes. So thank you for being an ambassador of that change.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Minds on the Frontline podcast. We have more great content coming out soon. Please check us out on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook, and make sure to like and subscribe to all Minds on the Frontline podcast social media channels. Thank you, and have a great day.